Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Resident Alien. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I thought that was a neat opening where it's just like, obviously, like you have Harry out and about. I was wondering if that was like a real life sequence at first, because I was thinking like, oh, like we're seeing him as an alien, but I'm like, oh, maybe he's getting attached to everybody at the time. It's like, oh, hey, high-fiving people, having the time of his life. I thought that's what it was kind of be, but we're just kind of seeing the perspective of just him just as his alien self instead of like how everyone else is seeing him as regular Harry. But then like he has a wife and everything. I was like, oh, and then like he gets something delivered, you know, it's like, oh, hey Harry, hey Bill, and opens it up and it's his weapon. And it, once again, I talked about it, anytime people disintegrate, my immediate thought was, oh, I mean, it makes sense, aliens kind of vaporizing people and kind of goes to the territory, but you immediately go, oh, everyone's getting Thanos snapped away, you know? So that's what I'm like, it's just ingrained in my, like I said, I've talked about this recently. I think that's going to be like the pop culture thing of anyone disintegrating or at least like falling into pieces like that. It's like, oh, they got snapped. I think that's just going to be kind of pop culture thing, but regardless, the tangents aside. But then him waking up like that, and he's like, oh, I guess I can dream now. Which part of me, I didn't know how to necessarily interpret that dream, because it's like, part of me is like, oh, you're like, he looked sad when he was wiping everybody out, because I think maybe in that dream it's just kind of like, oh, he actually kind of got attached to this place, even though he looks down upon humans, even though he hates this place, but he was there with his, you know, wife and child, so I think maybe things have changed. Like, I guess it's like, oh, maybe he could have potentially, well, for one, I think it's one, he's missing home, and now on top of that, like this place, I guess in his dream had become like a home, but you know, maybe subconsciously starting to feel that way even though he doesn't realize it. But obviously there's the whole thing of Liv and Mike. Obviously police are still looking for the body, which Liv figured, oh, because of the current, I'm sure it's on the shore. But Harry's like, oh, currents are wrong. But also Mike is like, I feel it in my balls. And it's like, you know, you can't trust your balls. They're nuts. And it's like, ha, 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 ha. He made a joke and everything. But also this episode showcases you, Liv is actually the more competent cop. Obviously Mike has this bravado about just being like top dog. But it's honestly, it's kind of a bit of a bumbling idiot in his own right. But it's like Liv is the one that actually seems like she's the one kind of on top of things. But she's so meek and just kind of like passive, that like someone as aggressive and just like loud and obnoxious as Mike can just easily like outshine her and just kind of shut up, I know what I'm talking about. It's like, but when the evidence comes back later on, it's like, okay, he's like, all this stuff is pertinent to the case. She's like, oh, here's a doorknob. He's like, Liv, he's almost like, Liv, you idiot. There are houseboats. You know what houseboats have? They have doors. Doors have doorknobs, don't they? That's it. It's not evidence. It's like, but we know it's like, oh, because when Harry, well, the alien was in the process of killing Harry, it like threw him through his door. So like it's most likely the door frame from that got pushed into the water and it got, you know, stuck there when the water froze over. So it's like Liv might be able to correlate, like maybe they could dust it for fingerprints or something, or she might go to Harry's house at one point in time and notice, oh, this doorknob is very, that depends on like how Harry went, well, alien Harry went about like fixing it. But it's like, it's showing you, like I said, she's a lot more competent than Mike. Kind of like, she's going to end up being the one figuring things out, which is going to suck because if she gets too close to this, Harry's going to have no choice but to kill her, which is going to be kind of a shame. But we'll kind of see we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But another aspect to this episode is Harry was invited over by Dan and Kate to have dinner with them. It's like, oh, kind of, you know, the whole thing about Max thinking you're an alien. So I was like, I literally won't take no for an answer. So what's your answer? No. I can't hear you. I'm going to take your silence as a yes. I was like, that's such a dick move. Because for Harry, it's like all these people coming together just to eat. He's like, no, give me an empty room, a spoon, and some pie. I'm good. So he kind of got dragged along. I even love the thing between Asta and Darcy about, like, you know, how much of a wild child each one of them was back in the day. And I love that Harry comes over and it's kind of like, Asta, can you go with me? Because that way you can talk to Ben and Kate and I can just sit alone. She's like, that's a little weird, but I'm busy. And then, like, Darcy kicks her and she's like, well, Darcy might be able to go. And Darcy's like, I don't know. It's like, okay. She's like, no, I can't. I'm kind of busy until 5 to midnight. What time is the dinner party? It's like, 6 p.m. She's like, oh my God, it works out. So that's so cool. I love that. He's like, I wasn't going to pay you because if I did, that would make you a prostitute. She's like, I like him. But Max also not too happy about the circumstances about like, oh, this dinner and everything. Because I love the fact is that he's like explaining to his parents. He's like, no, I understand what this is. You guys are trying to break the news to me. He's like, I'll stay with Dad Monday and Wednesday. You'll get me on the weekends, Mom, and Thanksgiving because Mom can actually cook. And it's like, well, we're not getting a divorce. They didn't ask the question of why he immediately assumed the bad news was going to be about. I guess it's like, well, I'm killing it at school. I'm a decent kid. I'm not getting in trouble too much. So if you got any bad news, it's got to be about you. Like none of them, they didn't even question like why he immediately jumped to them potentially getting divorced. And but also the fact is he's willing and able to process it like that. I think speaks volumes. Maybe that's a good thing. I think that shows you're at least a well-adjusted enough kid where you're like, okay, like they don't have to explain. He's like, no, if you guys are getting a divorce, I understand it's sad, but okay, I've kind of figured out how this potentially is going to work out. But it's like, oh wait, Harry's coming over. Why don't you just? Why aren't you just getting a divorce? That'd be so much better than bringing Harry over. So he wants to just run and leave. But Sahar, it's like, no, I got an idea. Like, she's like saying, like, let's take advantage of the situation. So Harry comes over with Darcy, and I love just the awkwardness of the whole situation because also it's like Max is hugging him and everything, and Harry's like, what the? He's like, something's up with this kid. This kid is weird. I even love later on he'd be like, I think the kid's not faking it. He must actually like me, which is understandable. I'm a likable alien. But it's this awkward thing where Darcy's bringing up all this stuff about Ben's past. Because, like, oh, not only have we known each other since we were kids, probably doesn't help that she's drinking a little bit. I think it's also, like, I think because of the conversation she has later on with Liv, I think ties into that. Because Liv, is talking about, like, oh, you were kind of the pride of, you're, like, the best, like, thing that ever kind of came out of Colorado. Like, you kind of put Patience, Colorado on the map. And obviously for Darcy, she feels like she kind of doesn't have anything. Like, she just feels like, I think she's kind of lost a little sense of who she was. And I think with Ben, might have been a situation when I don't know if they specified how long ago the whole Olympic situation where she messed up her leg, like how long ago that was. Because that could have been like a thing of maybe that's around the time her and Ben pulled apart. I don't know. I mean, it might be the thing of like she's kind of drinking a lot. She's kind of the party animal that she is. Because I think it's her kind of like hiding like her deeper fears and concerns. Like she's trying to put up this appearance like, yeah, I'm on top of things, but I think it's her overcompensating because she's kind of sad on the inside. Because I think it's more likely like being around Ben is kind of reliving her glory days because she probably feels like everything else is kind of on a downward spiral, sadly. So it's like, oh yeah, like me and Ben, like, oh, he was actually my first kiss. And she's like, oh, and Kate was finding this all out. She's like, why didn't you mention it? Which I'm like, well, it was a kiss, like in 5th grade, why would that matter? But I guess it's like they've been around her enough for like, how could that not come up? But then it also turns out, oh no, like she's like, actually I also taught him everything he knows about sex too, because we dated in 10th grade as well. So it's like, so there's I mean, I guess it's understandable because there's stuff that Ben hasn't told her about. I mean, it's like it's interesting. I'm curious about that, like if how people feel about like, oh, should you talking about your dating history and stuff like that, because I guess it's just the fact is because it makes it seem like he's hiding it, especially because they're having like this whole conversation about like, oh, our teacher and stuff like that, haha, like they're having a moment. I'm sure that kind of makes Kate feel a little off basis, especially because we get the conversation about like, oh, she's like, oh, I want to move to New York, and he's like, oh, you didn't talk to me about it. She's like, I thought you wanted to change, which I think that's where you can kind of see where Max might be getting the idea of like, oh, you guys kind of fight a lot, you don't get along. But it's like she's wanting a change. It's like you've lived in this town your entire life. Darcy kind of has as well. Because the whole thing came about because Harry, they're like, oh, where are you from? And he's like, New York. And then he's quoting the intro to Law and Order. It's like there's investigating crimes and the prosecutors that prosecuted. And yeah, there's a lot of sex in the city. I was like, okay, so obviously you're because he made another reference that I think was outside of Law and Order as well, but it's like, so it's not just Law and Order you know about sex in the city and stuff like that, or it might be, I wonder, is he well versed in the show, or is he just like, oh, I'm familiar with the title and the premise of it taking place in New York, maybe that's all there is to it, I don't know. But I think Darcy's a little oblivious to like what's going on there. But just, I love it. I even love Harry being like, whoa, like this actual model of the universe is actually pretty accurate. It's like, oh yeah, he got those moons. It's like, no, those aren't moons. Those are like manned satellites or something. It's like, oh, ha 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 ha. They're making jokes and stuff like that. And even when Max was reading that book he had about the giver, which Darcy's like, I'm a giver, I'm all about giving. Haha. Kate's super uncomfortable to the point like Darcy fell asleep on her, and it's like, yeah, I think it's someone's bedtime and someone else's too. But like it looked like Harry was actually kind of like almost tearing off a little bit, because I guess for him it's like, oh my god, humans are able to make such beautiful stories. I've never read The Giver, so I don't know, but maybe it was something. It seemed like he was almost getting a little emotional from the story, so I was like, oh, like he's a lot more human than he kind of thinks. So, but obviously the whole thing was like Max trying to give Sahar like more time. I was wondering. I thought she was going to get the key and go to Harry's place or something. I thought that's what it was. It's like, no, she went to duplicate the key, which I'm like, actually, that's super smart. I'm an idiot. I'm 28 years old, and it never would have. It didn't even cross my mind to think. Oh, of course, the smart thing to do would be able to duplicate the key so that you can kind of break into his place whenever you want to. I was like, oh, that's super smart. You kids are super smart. I'm an idiot. But regardless. I also love that her being at the store and everything. I even love Liv being like, whoa, you just skipped in front of that girl. She's like, what? I'm with you. I'm getting this model car and everything. Because if I don't, like some kid might be playing with it outside, rolls out in the street and they get hit by a car. And then like Sahar's behind him looking like, oh my God, like, why would you say that, especially in front of a kid? But Liv leans back and is like, hey, he likes collecting cars. She's like, don't talk to me. I'm buying tampons and I'm embarrassed. I was like, that's actually super adorable. I thought that was super cute. Oh, I forgot. There was a point. Oh yeah, she was looking for Harry's keys at one point, and she was like, she actually hit the horn, and she was like, shoot. She's like, and she looks up. She's like, I'm sorry, Allah. And I was like, that's the most. Once again, I've talked about this recently. Kids cursing is so adorable. Her saying shoot and it's like, sorry, Allah. I was like, that's adorable, dude. I was like, it's so cute. But the fact is, her like getting the key made, and luckily, they were able to put the key back before he found out. And I was like, honestly, I was so curious, like if Harry was kept under this delusion of like, oh, the kid actually likes me, especially because he's like, I've tried to kill you twice. He's like, no, Dad. He said, no, I've tried to kill you 3 times, But it's like, I wonder what that dynamic would have been like if that lie had kept up. Of like, oh, you actually like me. Like, would that have changed Harry's opinion about like, oh, maybe I won't kill the kid, or maybe it's like, maybe I won't make his death as brutal. Maybe I'll keep it a little lighthearted. I'll make it simple and easy. No suffering involved. I don't know. I'm curious like how that would have ultimately ended up playing out. But Darcy and him kissing, and she's like, well, that's not, I wonder, was she just being nice, or is that actually true? That's not the worst kiss I've had. He's like, no, I've seen this, I can do this, but also like apparently got an erection. He's like, oh, rigor mortis, my penis is dying. Line of the episode. But at the same time, there's a whole situation of Asta confronting Jay about the pills. It's like, because Darcy had gotten in her head of like, I kind of need to. It's probably her. Like, she's 17. We did some crazy shit when we were 17. But Jay's almost like, whoa, how can you even question me? And it's like, I would have immediately thought it was Jay just because of her. Like, there might be some extenuating circumstances at home or something like that. The reason why she probably. I don't know. I'm curious about that. Maybe her family life isn't as great as Asa probably hopes for. But maybe there's something else to that. It's like, because even Harry's like, oh yeah, like, oh, of course she thinks you did it because you are statistically most likely the one who did it. So I'm curious on that front. I also love Harry taking it, and also it's like, that's not yours, and he just smells it, and then he just like walks away putting it in his pocket. But they need someone to administer like a shot to Asta's grandma, but it's like, well, a doctor needs to kind of do it. And it's like, oh, Harry's on call now. And Dan's like, I don't want him to go. And Harry's like, I don't want to go. But it's like, yeah, and I don't want the men in my life not to be children, but we don't always get what we want. And so on the drive there, and I love that moment for Harry where it's like, oh, like, they're not talking. He's like, so people, even being together, humans can still be alone, which is like, that's actually like, obviously he's like so delighted about it, but at the same time it's like, oh, that's actually like a sad aspect of humanity, of like that we can still be surrounded by people but sadly still feel alone, and in many different facets of reasons. But I also love that we got confirmation on those two looking for the alien. They aren't aliens, because I was flipping back and forth whether they were military or alien. It's like they're government agents. She's all about killing people. Like, I'm willing to kill anyone. Like, the general needs us to bring in this alien. I'm willing to kill anyone that gets in the way, even you. So, you know, with all the whining, you better be careful. And I was like, oh, this is your partner in all this, and you're threatening to kill him. And it's like, I wondered if she kind of regretted the moment he leaves, because she's reading the writer's script from the book. But also, like, that moment between Harry and the other dude, he was like, oh, do you ever shiver when you pee? He was like, sometimes. I was like, oh. So, because the lady was like, oh, it's not like the alien's just going to walk up to us. It's like, Harry was literally right outside, so they're not going to know it's Harry, because obviously, like, only one person needed. Well, it's going to be that way if they meet up with Max, and that's going to be an interesting storyline if those two cross paths, and it's like, maybe it's going to be a situation where eventually Max is actually going to be like, oh, man, it kind of sucks, because Harry isn't as bad, so, like, I don't know, or maybe he'll use this as an opportunity of like, nah, screw that alien, he's going to get it, like, so these people want him, I'm going to hand him over. Maybe that's what it is, or maybe Max is going to have a soft spot for Harry at that point in time and kind of give him away at first, but then kind of, you know, wants to help him out because it's like, oh, I don't want him to keep dissected. I mean, I don't know. We'll see kind of how things, because there's still enough time for, like, their dynamic and relationship to potentially change in that time frame, and things could end up being different. Like I said, we'll have to wait and see. But I thought this was kind of a nice continuation of Harry's story, too, of, like, how being around family, you know, because at first he was like, he thought humans were only around each other when it came to food, just because it was just food that kind of brought people together. But it's like, no, it's the company, and seeing that, you know, it made him lonely. Like, he was already homesick last episode, and now it's even more so now under these circumstances. Seeing all these people together, I think it just, you know, makes him feel that much more alone, especially because this is a foreign world to him. He's, you know, detached from everybody. And, you know, obviously that family dynamic of, you know, being around Dan's grandmother, giving her the shot. He's like, okay, you'll be numb for about 15 minutes, but you'll be up and at him and have enough energy to whip Dan. And it's just like this moment between all of them. Even that line from her, it's a dark line, but it's like, oh, Harry, you can trust him. And Asta's grandma was like, yeah, I haven't met a white man I can't trust. And I was like, oh, that's a super dark joke. But nevertheless, but Harry being not realizing that, you know, some things he should have kept to himself, he kind of blurted out the fact is that, Asa already has a daughter. She has a 17-year-old named Jay. It's like, what? It's like, oh yeah, Jay. He's like, you two have the same, so he figured it out on his own because they have the same facial structure. And it's like, oh, they act the same way. He's like, oh, they even run out of the room the same way when they get emotional. Because Dan didn't. I figured as much the way the conversation was last episode, kind of about like, oh, maybe she'll be back in your life. So it's like, oh, so like it hinted that Asta hadn't told him that Jay was in her life, that Jay was, and for him, that's what shocked him, because it's like, I've run into that girl, I've served her pancakes so much, and you've never told me that was my granddaughter, you know. And she was talking to her cousin, isn't it the one with the baby? That's her cousin, right? Because she says like Uncle Dan. But what ended up being the case was like, she is talking to her being like, yeah, you kind of kept a big secret, and a lot of people are going to be hurt by your secret that you kept this on. But it's like, I get it. You were 16, you know, because also was like, I couldn't take care of her. I was 16, like I was a child myself. But it's like, I get it. You did what you thought was best for Jay. That's what any mother would do. And Asta and Dan had that like heart to heart where he was like, why didn't you tell me? Like, she was like, you wanted me out. Like, you didn't like that I was pregnant. He was like, is that what you're telling yourself? It's like, I didn't want you to be with Jimmy. That was the biggest issue. You left and you went off with Jimmy. And it's like, that was the main issue in that regard. And so for Dan, it's a situation, because she was like, I didn't want to, you know, turn to you, you know. It's like, what was I supposed to do? Like, go to class with the baby? He was like, but we would have all been, if you had told us, like, I would have been there for you. This entire family, we would have taken, you know, because this isn't, you know, it's like a little community. Like, this is, you know, our family is a community. So we would have worked together to, like, you know, take care of Jay. But for Asa, it was this actually sad sentiment for her, being like, you already took in one child and raised that wasn't your own. I didn't want to kind of burden you with my own child and kind of put that on you. You'd already done so much. Because obviously when she was younger, they had their issues. So I'm sure that added fuel to that fire. But it's also like, you know, because I think she was at the age where she was a little rebellious later on in life too. So it's like, I think that added to it. But she's like, are we going to be okay? And he's like, even when we're not okay, we're always going to be okay. I was like, I thought that was a beautiful sentiment. Also, Harry playing ball with the others. Obviously, like, that whole, like, not knowing how to play. I mean, he hit that first shot. They're like, hey, you know how to hoop? And he's like, hoop. And that's his thing now. I love that. But, obviously a lot of the elements of like understanding what the game, even the whole situation and working as a team, not something I think it makes you wonder, does his people work often together as a team? I'd assume, like, I'm curious, like, how similar humans and aliens are, his species or his people are in comparison to humans. Like, is there a lot of like working together? Like, I assume there's a lot of commonality in that regard. So, but maybe it's just like it's foreign to him in this regard. Or maybe it's foreign to him because his people are all very like, we're independent, we'll kind of do our own thing. So maybe that's kind of what that was hinting at. But that moment between him and Asta, I thought was kind of beautiful. Obviously him staring up, he's like, yeah, my planet's like 46 light years away, but for him, he's like, it feels so close, like almost if you took a string, you could almost pull yourself towards it. And, he's like, should I apologize? He's like, she's like, you could. And he's like, I'm sorry about the whole Jay thing. She's like, actually, you did us a favor, because that was something she had kept secret for so many years, and now it's kind of out in the open, and now the entire family knows. So it's like, also the question is how she's going to handle this with Jay, like, because it's like, her cousin, like I said, I believe her cousin was like, Jay, you've had her, you've been basically stalking your daughter the entire time, even going to the point of like having her work with you, but she's probably got questions about where she came from and, who her mom is. And it's like, you're being there in front of her, having all the answers, never giving them to her. So it's going to be interesting to see how Asta handles this going forward. But Harry actually opened up to her about something really interesting, where he was talking about the fact is that, he misses home. And it's like, she's like, do you have any family there? He was like, I had a wife, but she died. And I was like, and now that adds more elements to that dream, because that probably like, the wife and baby, it's like that's probably what he wanted. But I mean, maybe he has a child back home, or maybe he has or maybe him and his wife never got that far. We don't know the circumstances around her death. But she's like, I'm sorry, Harry, it's sad. He was like, yeah, just I think for him it's like he didn't have a place he felt like he belonged, and I think that's it was this really heartwarming moment between them. And then on the drive back, like Dan, Harry, and Asta in the truck together, and the music playing and kind of dancing a little bit. It was neat. At the same time, there's the whole Max and Sahar situation, them on their bikes, and Mike stops them and it's like, oh, you didn't do the hand signals and stuff like that. It's like, you kids got to be careful and stuff like that. I love him. He was like, he kind of cursed in front of me. He's like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be cursing in front of you. I didn't mean to say all that shit in front of you. And I love Sahar. Once again, super adorable. I can't say the D word or the S word, but I can hear them and not get in trouble. He's like, well, that's good to hear. And it's like, well, make sure, you get the reflector fix and you do your arm signal, because you know what they say, if you don't do your arm signal, a truck is going to rip them off. And it's just like, who says that, Mike? You are terrible. Because it's like, they're like, oh, we're going to... Because he's happy for them. He's like, oh, I'm happy you guys are outside and not got your faces in a screen or whatever. And then, but they break into Harry's place. They see the pieces of his ship. Luckily, they can't get in the freezer, but they see the floating apple, and they touch it and get zapped. Harry comes back home, and the whole situation of him discovering them, and then it's like, well, crap. He's like, and he's checking their pulses, because at first when his hand was reaching, I was like, oh, is he going to think about killing Max while he can? But he checks and he's like, damn it, they're still alive. And he puts them in bags. I was like, what are you going to necessarily do? And lo and behold, he walks, and some lady's there. He's like, what are you doing? She's like, how'd you get in here? He's like, I still have a key. I'm still your wife. And he drops the bags like, shit. And I was like, yes, I knew it. Because I referenced, like, in the first episode, kind of, once again, a Banshee situation. In the TV show Banshee, there was kind of a similar situation, minus the whole alien thing of someone stealing someone else's identity. Well, part of the story beats, I won't go into it, because in case you ever wanted to watch Banshee, because you need to watch Banshee, it's a damn good show. A similar thing happened. So I figured Harry would have some family. This is going to be interesting, too, with the whole Asta situation, because it's like, well, you told her that your wife is dead and your wife is in town and stuff like that, but it's probably going to be a thing of it's a metaphor, which is also going to get complicated because of the old Darcy thing, because Darcy kind of likes him, but then maybe, Darcy might even get pissed, like, oh, how dare I be your... Because I forgot to talk about that little moment she had where he was like, this is a date, and she, like, with a question mark, she's like, what? Whoa, slow down, we just met. See what I mean? He's the one that actually said it first, so it's not weird, so he thinks it's a date, and now he's like, oh, which is it? It's so cute because, like, he's really into me, or something like that. It's just, I love that. But like I said, it's just, I think, Darcy's hiding a lot of, like, pain and insecurities, and kind of, like, presents herself in a certain way to kind of, mask that, which is very sad. But, because she tried to, pep Liv up when Liv was down. And obviously we see that with Liv being like, you know what? Screw whatever Mike has to say. I'm a damn good cop. Even Darcy being like, you're actually the only cop people like in town. So it makes you wonder, when did this Mike thing come about? Like, I guess because Liv's lived there her entire life. So I guess Mike must be a relatively new transfer or something. Maybe there's extenuating circumstances of why he's in Patience Colorado. Maybe there's probably a story there. But this is definitely going to complicate things in many different regards for Harry, because it's like, oh yeah, here's my wife. I guess like they're separated, but maybe they're in the process of getting divorced, but they're separated. So that's why she's like, I'm still your wife in that regard, I guess. So like I said, he's probably going to have to make it seem like, oh, the dead was kind of a metaphor, which obviously it's not a metaphor, it's real, but now it's going to complicate things. So I am really curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward to the next episode, especially because it's like, hey, you got these 2 unconscious kids in your bags. It's like, what are you going to do with that? You can't just straight up kill them. That's going to draw too much attention. So we'll see kind of how that all ends up playing out. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.